What's up, everybody? Welcome to With All Due Respect. I'm Marcus Flowers, and that's our good friend Madeline Summerville. Maddie,
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. I got a little cold, but other than that, I'm doing good. How
Those
about
little,
you?
those little summer colds, man, they pop up.
I know, it's the
Just gotta
worst.
get them out of the way before summer vacation starts. I was telling my wife today, she was saying she feels a little under the weather, and I said, it might be a summer cold. And,
And you guys are heading out to
learn.
Yellowstone soon, right?
Yeah, we're heading out to Yellowstone, and definitely don't want anybody sick on that trip out there.
Nope,
So,
nope, too much
want to be
fun. Don't want to miss it.
able to enjoy it. And if I'm going to get sick, I want to get it out of the way too. So you got a couple of weeks
Absolutely.
to get sick and have your little summer cold in and be done with it. So
Take a lot of that emergency. Drink a lot of the
it
the,
does
the
help.
orange
It
juice and
does
stuff.
help. It absolutely does. I always try and load up on it as soon as I feel a little bit of something going on, that tickle in
Yeah.
the throat. I start loading up. Well, anyway, everybody, this is the show where we cut through the noise, call out the nonsense, and actually talk about what's happening. Not the version you get in the press, and definitely not the version you get from people who think that yelling is a substitute for leadership. Every week, we bring you real conversations with real people who are in the fight, candidates, organizers, experts, folks who aren't just talking about making change. They're actually out there trying to make it happen. And then we break down the news and the headlines because let's be honest, the news cycle right now, it's a lot. War, politics, culture, it's all colliding, and somebody's got to make sense of it. So, whether you're here to stay informed, get fired up, or just hear somebody say what you've been thinking all week,
Hmm.
you're in the right place. So, let's get into it with our guest today, Nico Parra.
Hey.
Hey, how are y'all?
Going,
Good. How are
Nico.
you? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. Nico is a proud son of Colombian immigrants, a product of the Gwinnett County, Georgia School District, or public schools, a lifelong community organizer. Um, Nico's also a school teacher.
Mhm.
Nico believes that we can do better in this country. He believes that wages are stagnating, the cost of basic necessities are increasingly unaffordable, and that is unacceptable. I can't say that I disagree with any of that.
Yeah.
Nico recently lost his bid for Georgia House District 109, but that hasn't stopped him from staying engaged. Nico, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Marcus and Matt. I really appreciate the invitation and for being here and speaking about the journey that I went on.
Oh, absolutely. So let's get into it. Tell the people, our audience, tell them a little bit about your story and things that people didn't hear out on the campaign trail.
Yeah, of course. Happy to. Well, of course, my name is Nico Parra. I've grown up all my life here in Gwinnett County, one of the most diverse counties in Georgia. And I come from a family of immigrants. I mentioned that because that really is what gave me motivation to even start my run in the first place. Early on, growing up in a diverse school district like Gwinnett County Public School System, language equity was a big focus for me, for my family, for my neighbors, for my friends, for my colleagues later on. And that being said, a lot of what I did was centered around community organizing, ensuring that we have accessibility for every single resident in our district, in our county, in our area. And that fight has not stopped. What happened on May 19th has not deterred me in the slightest. If anything, it has re-energized, it's giving me my motivation again to continue the work that I do with every conversation, every door I knock, every phone bank I host, every person I speak to one-on-one or in group settings. It really does show that the community deserves much more than they have right now. We deserve more than mediocrity, and I do really stand by that and by the decision to engage with people as human beings, not as numbers, not as statistics, not as what politicians often do, but as someone that deserves dignified lives, right? As people that deserve a roof over their head, food on their table, the ability to send their kids off to college one day. That really is what I've always fought for.
Right, and you were a first-time candidate, right?
I'm a first-time candidate. That is correct.
So, growing up, what shaped your interest in public service?
Yeah, so one of my first ever, I guess, pathway into public service was when I was a poll worker. I became a poll worker when I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school. I was 16, yeah, and I recall this was back in the 2020 presidential elections, November, and of course it was, as many of us already remember, the height of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
In that, many of the poll workers that we were used to there were very friendly, people that were in our neighborhoods, people that we knew. Oftentimes they were typically older.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was that because a lot of them decided to stay home because of their health, a lot of those from high school and colleges were being recruited by Gwinnett County.
Yeah.
And so I remember that day very well. It was my first ever really job that I had. I remember working there from 5 a.m. all the way until 11 p.m. that day. And I loved it, every single second of it, right? Whether it was going outside, putting out the tapes to mark the 6 feet of distance, right, for the voters in the line, whether it was, collecting someone's ID, processing them to the poll pad, whether it was handing someone a provisional ballot, right, or giving someone a sticker at the end that said, I voted, and then waving them off, right? Every single second of that experience really stuck with me, right? It was not lost on me, the role that poll workers play as the front line of defense against any form of voter suppression. And so that really stuck with me. And from there on, I became more involved with poll worker recruitment drives, with voter registration drives, especially when it came to high schools, because, of course, I never forgot where I came from. And till this day, I still engage with a lot of voter education initiatives and whatnot. And so, that's really what kind of got me started, is voter education, voter registration, being a poll worker. And on top of that, of course, also understanding that a lot of people in my neighborhoods also did not speak English. And so given my position as someone who's bilingual, as a native speaker of Spanish, it was really an easy step up to understand that, hey, we have people that deserve to vote, right? We have had, years, decades, movements of people that have sacrificed, right, for the right for us to vote. And that's not lost on me. And so because of that, I knew that my calling was to help ensure that every single resident, every single neighbor of mine, every single family member, friends, would continue to have their rights be unimpeded, right? So that's really what got me going very early on.
Oh yeah, and that's awesome that you kind of got in on the ground floor of democracy, really, at such a young age, and just ran with it. And the fact that you were a first-time candidate. Look,
Yes.
I mean, I've told you this before. I think you have a long career ahead of you in politics. I've been impressed by you, and just that tenacity and that drive, and the way you communicate with people. I
Thank you.
see
That means a lot. It
I just
does.
want to tell you, don't ever get discouraged, because you join a long list of people like Barack
Ronald
Obama,
Reagan.
Abe Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, who lost their first race, or
Yeah.
and maybe
Yes,
first
true.
and second race.
I mean, look no further than our own senator, who's John Ossoff, right? We all know.
And I was going to say, my next question was going to be, who are some of the early influences
Yes.
that made
Yes.
you believe you could run for office? That was what I was going to lead into.
Yeah. So I guess early on, right? This was in high school. I wasn't really political. I know many of us probably heard of the High School Democrats of America, of Georgia. I highly encourage those that are listening to join that if you are in high school and you find yourself in that opportunity. But I was not one of them, because I was not really aware of, my political, the circumstances, background, and whatnot, right? And if going back, I wish I was. But I recall that, being involved early on, I saw President Obama as someone who was inspiration. I saw the way he spoke, the way he was courteous, the way that he was able to work on bipartisan nature, to have goals, the way that he wasn't compromising on his own values, really stuck with me, right? And because especially
because your generation kind of grew up with President Obama. So.
We did. Well, and of course, unfortunately, we did have Trump, right? And I recall.
I think I'm a millennial. I think it ended with me. So
yeah, I mean, I'm a bit, a little bit younger, because I do remember that it was in middle school. I want to say 7th or 6th grade, where I remember going in one day to school, and I would see people. We usually had the morning announcements shown in the morning before school started, and kids were sobbing. And keep in mind, right, that my district was predominantly Black and brown. We had a lot of immigrants in that school district enrolled there. And so people were sobbing when they heard the news the day after Trump got elected. And so, of course, that stuck with me, the fact that people were living in an era of fear, right?
Yeah.
Given that what's happening with national politics, and that stuck with me, right? So I would say that early on, one of my first influences would be President Obama, and really understanding that. Look, I think also the justice system for me was something where I would look at news, I would look at convictions overturned, I would look at people on the streets being detained, people that were, losing on their constitutionally protected rights, due process rights. And so that really stuck with me. Early on, I actually wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. But then I think just hearing more speeches and seeing what really effective politicians and elected leaders can do made me realize that I wanted to fix the system from within. That I didn't necessarily want to, practice law in that sense, but I wanted to impact and change law so that way in the future people would no longer be as negatively impacted by the justice system we have right now. So I do give that my early credit to him and to many others in that field.
I'm sure you're touching Maddie's heart right now. So.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a recovering practicing lawyer because I think when I was in law school, I focused on policy primarily, on child policy, and then needed to take care of families. So I ended up getting an annoying lawyer job. I still couldn't do the defense work thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it was civil defense. I still couldn't do it. But it gave me a really great background to be able to think a certain way when I'm making arguments, I guess.
Absolutely.
And so there's plenty of ways to get to, there's plenty of pathways to get to where you want to be. And I think it's shaping your argument so that you can get as much influence as possible. And you already sound so good at communicating. Like I needed like a lot of help, and I still do. So I wanted to ask you, when do you feel like was the moment that you knew for sure that you were going to run?
So truthfully, I had thought about this maybe a couple years back in advance when I first got involved with politics. I did my research. I realized that early on, local and state politics and government was far more effective, I would say, than national. When I thought of national, federal politics, I would always think of the back and forths, right? That I would see on Fox News, on CNN, and it just felt like there was such an environment of polarization, right, where people were at each other's throats and not realizing that they were elected to fight and work, emphasis on work for the people that they were first elected by. And so early on, I said, you know what, DC is not for me, right? I want to focus on my neighborhood, the people that I grew up with all my life, right? My childhood friends. And so I spoke initially with, I became an intern through Georgia State University. It was called GLIP, and I became an intern at the House Minority Leader at the time, James Beverly. And through that, I was able to get connected with my own state representative, Representative Dewey McClain, as well as my state senator, Sheikh Rahman. And from there, I was able to learn a lot more about the policies they write, the laws they write, the work they do. And what really attracted me was constituent services. Many of us watching the stream probably are familiar with constituent services at the congressional level or the Senate level, right? But not so much at the local level. Every single state representative, they have their own.
You've got great state representatives in Gwinnett.
You do.
Sheikh is one of the, I love that guy.
You love Sheikh. Everybody loves Sheikh.
He's a great guy, right? He's like a grandpa to a lot of us, right? He's very nice.
Good heart.
Very hard, right? And you can tell with these people that they come in these for the right reasons, because being a state representative by no means is a lucrative job. No. Your salary is averaging around 27, 28K a year. You oftentimes, a lot of expenses are out of pocket. Oftentimes, they don't give expenses to cover, let's say, paid staffers, right? If you want to have an office dedicated constituent services, that's on your dime. And the reality is
to the
gas and everything to Atlanta. I mean, look, I'm Metro Atlanta. I'm in Gwinnett. I can only imagine what it's like for those from Savannah, from Dalton, right? From all over the parts of Georgia, right? And that being said, it's done intentionally in the sense that people that run for office now, you see them and they're usually from the same wealthier backgrounds, right? And I see that because oftentimes I, as a first-time candidate, I, as a grassroots progressive candidate, would sometimes feel not alienated, but felt as if, this wasn't right for me, because again, so much of what goes into a campaign is done through, expenditures, donations, money, wealth. And given that, again, I was 21, right, when I first launched my campaign last year, And by no means that I come from a wealthy background. A lot of it was something that was hard fought. I had to work, claw my way to become an effective candidate, to have a campaign that I am proud of. And so I say all that to say is that, look, state politics, local politics, it may seem like a difficult endeavor at first, but it truly is necessary. You need people on the ground who are able to communicate with constituents that have never been spoken to, people that have never had their questions or issues resolved. And you need to fight for them. That really is what people elect you to do, and that is what I intend to do later on in life when I get another chance to run again.
Tell us how your family reacted to your decision.
Yeah, well, early on, of course, right? I told myself that I was not going to make a full-on decision without the blessing of my family and those around me, right? And so I am an only child. I am blessed to have two supportive parents.
This is why you're such a good communicator. Right?
Yeah. I mean, look, they really instilled in me a sense of being able to communicate and being able to have good conversations with folks that wasn't always about, okay, well, what do you do for me? What can you do for me? It's more of like, well, what can I do for them? Right. It should be mutual. And at the end of the day, them being immigrants, obviously that status was in danger, because of what happened with Trump, because of him, not regarding due process as a constitutionally protected rights. And through that, I know that what I wanted to do most of anything, correct, I wanted to protect my parents. I wanted to protect my loved ones, protect my neighbors that I grew up with. And so I told them, I said, hey, my campaign is centered around affordability, about accessibility. But most importantly, I want to make sure that you feel safe in where you live. And so public safety was another key component of our campaign. And so I spoke with them, sat them at the dining table, and we had a couple hours of conversation. And I told them this is what my vision was, that truly I was content with making sacrifices in my life because I really wanted what's better for them. I want what's best for a family that I would have down the road. And I know that many of those that are listening, perhaps, whether it's our immigrant parents, whether it's our parents that live here 7 generations, we know how much they sacrifice for their loved ones, for their children. My parents are no different. They came into America like many others, seeking the American dream. They came here, found that it was out of reach, but they have not stopped working since then. They have not tried to stop accomplishing all the hard work for the sake of their children. In this case, a child, me. And so that being said, I had their full blessing, had their full support. My mom was out there knocking doors with me. My dad was also out there, talking to people, recruiting volunteers who would help me bundle literature, put it in bundles of 70 so we can hand out to our canvassers. They were all very involved and excited. And I know my family from Colombia would always be in contact with me saying, hey, we're proud of you. We were coming from another country, but, they really saw what we were doing here and they really wanted to be supportive in any way, right? So I guess I'm truly grateful that I had very supportive and loving parents that guided my decision there.
And it's funny because I feel like one of the reasons why I grew up to be able to learn how to be a good talker was because, which I'm not necessarily today because my head cold, but it's because my parents never shushed me when I was a little kid. Like when I was in conversations late at night or whatever, if it was like 9 o'clock, my parents let me stay up and I wanted to participate. They never shushed me. Or if I had a question, they would answer it. Like they treated me like I was part of the conversation. And I'm wondering, especially because you're an only child and have to fight with other siblings. Do you feel like they encouraged you to talk more? Because it's such an important skill, not just for politicians, but for life.
Yeah, I mean, so what was interesting was that I would say before I got involved as a poll worker, before I got involved with any sort of political internships or whatnot, we didn't really speak about politics, right? But I did sense that my parents, even though they couldn't vote, that they identified more with the Democratic Party in the sense that they believed in more equitable, policies, and that they believed that everyone should be able to live an affordable life, right? And so, I understood that already growing up. I was in a very supportive household where they encouraged me to follow my dreams. They encouraged me to follow what I wanted to do. And I said, hey, you know what? I don't want to be a hotshot lawyer, right? I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be someone that, I want to be someone that's on the ground, someone that
you really are. I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just listen. One of my best friends is on her city council, and let me tell you, you would have to pay me a stupid amount of money to do that job, a stupid amount of money, right? But the fact that you loved every little aspect of what you did when you were working as a poll worker, and like the first thing that you just said was constituent services, right? Like as somebody who's had the kind of internship jobs that you've had too, I'm like, they throw the interns on it because nobody wants to do it, because it's so hard to communicate with people and to make them happy. But if you come into it with an attitude like that, I feel like it's so much more helpful. So another thing I wanted to ask you too is, so one of my best friends ran for judge relatively recently, and she said that the thing that surprised her the most about it was that the people came out of the woodwork to support her who she never thought would, and people disappointed her who she never thought would. Like she really got to see people's true colors. So that was kind of her experience of like, that was the thing I learned. What do you feel like surprised you the most about your campaign?
I mean, that's a universal experience, I would say, with most candidates, especially I would say grassroots candidates, where that are not, I was not propped up by any corporation, by any outside, special interest PAC. I was propped up by the people in my neighborhood, by the people that I spoke to, the people that I wanted to represent. And so really, I had a lot of positive interactions with folks that, as you said, also came out the woodworks, those that I grew up in school. Because look, I spent kindergarten all the way till 12th grade in my district.
And Gwinnett has good schools. I mean, like, they're really good.
Yeah. I mean, well, I went to Conaheda, I went to Sweetwater, I went to GSMST. These schools are very familiar with the people here because they oftentimes have their own kids enrolled in these schools. So when I would go out and knock on doors, I would say, yeah, I grew up in the school system. And they were like, oh, what school? And then I told them, and then we had a good conversation based on all that. Yeah, it was great. And so, I mentioned all to say is that, we had people that would come out the woodworks to support this campaign, because it wasn't necessarily for one person, because, when we were perhaps in middle school or high school together, we didn't speak, right? But, later on when they were in college, they, got more politically involved and engaged. And they said, you know what, I see a candidate who supports an increase in the minimum wage. I see a candidate who supports, making housing affordable. I see a candidate who supports expanding Medicaid. And they saw that all those messages, all those policies were what our campaign was supporting. And so because of that, it was easy for them to take the next step and say, hey, you know what? I want to go to a meet and greet. I want to go to a canvas launch. I want to go to a phone bank launch. We also had many other community events as well, where we had people that would come out and support us because they maybe heard from their friends. They heard on social media, on TikTok and Instagram. And of course, on the flip side is what your judge friend mentioned, right? Sure. There were disappointing times, right? I don't want to sugarcoat this by any means. I want people to realize that, especially those that are listening, is that if you want to run for office, run for office. Don't let it stop you, but realize that the path to victory is a path that has a lot of obstacles.
It's winding, a winding road.
Marcus, I don't know.
Peaks and valleys.
I don't know if I think you're born like our friend here. I don't know if you can learn to communicate like that as so young. I mean, like, you're a really good communicator. We have people on the show all the time who are very passionate like you are, and it doesn't come through immediately like yours does. And you also are very fluid and comfortable, and it's easy for you to get right to the point too. I don't know if that gets taught in the amount of time that you've been alive. I don't know.
I know what, I just had conversations with folks. I think who I was at the start of this campaign back in September of 2025 is not the same person that is sitting in front of you right now.
You've been through a lot for your age in particular. So I'm really in no way trying to say, because you're young, I'm saying despite your age, you have a greater ability to communicate than I've seen with other people. So
thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
And it comes across authentically as well. Yeah. And that's always been a huge thing that I talk about when candidates ask me, questions about, how should I do this or do that or say this or say that? And I'm like, say it the way you'd say it.
Correct.
To your friend.
I agree.
Be your authentic self. That comes across much better. Don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to speak like someone you're not. Speak like you.
Yeah. Yes. Be authentic, because again, voters can see a mile away.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. And that brings me to, my next question. What was one of your favorite moments or something that really stuck out to you about being out in the district on the campaign trail, talking with and just interacting with people? What's something that really stuck out to you?
Well, I guess there were different periods of time throughout the campaign that, I had individual moments that stuck out with me. Early on, when I first started knocking on doors, right, I had people that would tell me about the issues they had, right? Part of what was kind of my script was me introducing myself, but also not making it all about myself and saying, hey, well, what can I do for you? What are issues that you have in mind that government has not stepped in and fixed? And that led to conversations that sometimes led to hour-long conversations of me standing outside, patiently listening and writing down notes at times as well. And so through that, I learned, of course, about negative experiences with healthcare, with pharmaceutical products, right? With families that would have issues with, let's say, language equity access, where they could not access a certain service because they were not able to speak English or any other language. And so through that, right, I was able to realize that, hey, these people are opening up to what is essentially a stranger, right? They don't know who I am. They open up and they are able to confide in me all the issues they've had, all their grievances. And I am someone that is fortunate to be in that position where I say, hey, this is what I can do, right? Even if I'm not elected, this is what I can do to help. And if I am elected, then this is what I also can do in addition to that, to also help you with your problems, with your struggles and situations. And so, early on, I would say the conversation at the doors are really impactful. There were many nights where I would spend, kind of exhausted and tired after a long day of, let's say, doing, tedious campaign work on the back end, right? But I would say the day where I was talking to voters one-on-one was really energizing. It kind of really brought me up from down the dumps and say, hey, you know what? You have a reason, as to say in this fight, you have a reason to continue the work you do because these people rely on you. And so through that was really something that was very impactful for me early on. Many events that we had as well was always community centered. We had cleanup events at the roads nearby where there was a lot of trash, litter. We would go out there for a couple hours every other week and clean up all these bags of trash and whatnot. And that was always so impactful to see that sometimes people would go up and, give us a nice supportive honk, right? Yeah. People sometimes on TikTok, we would post some of our videos, recap videos, and they would say, hey, we saw you with your shirts. One of our volunteers, our super volunteers, has bright pink hair. And so they recognize the volunteer with bright pink hair and they're, complimenting her and us and all of us, right? So I would say that conversations and hearing about what was positive, right, from the community and what they wanted really, got to me. And I think, of course, at the end, as we got closer to early voting and election day, especially on early voting, I would always have conversation with people. I would knock on, I would say, hey, this is Nico. I'm here to remind you about elections. And some of them would cut me off and say, hey, we voted for you already. My mom did, or my family did, or we put in absentee ballots for you. And I really do. I'd love that because people were very open. They were happy. They were excited to say, Nico, if you get elected, work for us, work well for us. And I would always follow up these people. I'll give them my business card and say, hey, you know what? This is my number. Win or lose, you contact me. You let me know what I can do to help the issues that you have, because this is never about a title. This is because of you. You are why I run, right? And so all that to say is that I would just say that the interactions I had with constituents, with neighbors, with residents, really is the positive beaming experience of throughout this campaign.
I enjoyed that as well, being out running a congressional race in, a very red district, getting out and talking to people, when I was running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, probably talked to thousands of people.
You did.
That had never seen a representative at their door. And, some of them were Republicans who were like, at least you came out and talked to me and asked questions, and listened to me, so that was always, like you said, energizing for me. I mean, as opposed to, sitting, doing call time, asking for, money. I'd rather be out talking to people,
Correct.
Engaging with the community or doing some type of event. That was always the best part of campaigning for me, is just talking to people. That gave me that energy to keep doing it. I did it for 2 years. So
if I may, you mentioned a good point, right? Because you had conversation and I'm very familiar with your district before. I've been up there many times. And Obviously you would have a lot of Republican voters in the district, as opposed or compared to my district, for example, which is a very deep blue, I would say 80-20 split, right? And I say that because even then I would have conversations with Republican voters, right? I would not shy away from that because I truly believe that as an elected official, sure, you may belong to a party, you may identify with a certain politics of a party, but you work for every single person there, right? Every single person that is within the boundaries of your map. And even some good representatives, as you and I both know, also work for people outside of their
whether
maps.
they voted for you or not. If you win, you represent them.
So. You represent them, right? And so sometimes I'd have a conversation with folks who, let's say on my list, right? I would have a list of Democratic voters in this household. But what ended up happening was I had, let's say, a Republican dad open up, right? And I would still engage with him. I would be very honest up front. I would never hide my identity. I never hid my fact that I was a son of immigrants. I never hid the fact that I believed in a stronger public school system, right? But I also knew that what really was I was able to come across as collaborative was on the topic of taxes, on the topic of lowering taxes, right? I think so many of us are content with what we see in the economy. I think there are valid criticisms to have with Democratic administrations as well as of course Republican administrations. And I say that because again, it doesn't matter who we have. Whether it's a Democrat as a president, whether it's a Democrat as a governor, the fact is that affordability will always remain the concern of voters, right? What they see at the gas pump, what they see in grocery prices, what they see in utility bills is the pocketbook issues is the most important thing. And so again, I told them to look straight up, I'm progressive, I'm a Democrat. I believe in progressive social values, right? But at the same point, right, I also believe in that you should live an affordable life, regardless of whether we see eye to eye on things like abortion rights, on LGBTQ and all that, right? I have my values, right? I'm being very upfront about it, or I'll be very honest. I'll never back down on that. But they also are very honest with me as well, right? They told me what they wanted. They told me that a lot of times they didn't really care about social issues. They really cared about their pocketbook issues, right? And I said, you know what? I can work with that. I can work with you on finding solutions, common sense solutions that works for you, for your neighbors, for me, for everyone, right? And that really was, I was able to have a lot more conversations, less, I would say a lot more positive interactions at doors compared to other approaches.
I really enjoyed those frank conversations at the doors where, yes, for those of you who are new to how campaigning actually works and canvassing actually work, yes, you have voter rolls and who or list, whose door you're going to most of the time. And you want to go to people who are in your party and vote frequently. But I wasn't just that candidate. I'd stop at doors that I knew were Republican doors and I'd have conversations. I'd have frank conversations. And sometimes I'd win those people over and get their vote. Sometimes, maybe not. But, just going down the list and saying, okay, I'm going to talk to these Democrats. I probably already have their vote anyway.
Sure.
Let's get some of those people who, maybe vote independent or have voted across party lines. Let's talk to them.
That's the reason you're there.
Exactly. Because in a district like the one I ran in, the numbers weren't quite there. So you had to pull in some independents and you had to pull over some Republicans. So I did that and I had those conversations, and those were some of the best conversations I had. So, and to that point, did any of the conversations that you had with some of the voters, did it shift them in their perspective in a meaningful way, you think?
Yeah, I do believe so, right? I had, as I mentioned before, I had a Republican who opened up, and he told me about that, like how his household was Democrats, right? And that he had some disagreements along the way, but he also really believed in that he wanted a better life for his grandchildren, right? He wanted them to go off to college, to find good paying jobs. And I said, you know what, sir, I agree with you on that, right? And at the end of our conversation, he told me that I think that would have been the first time he ever voted in a Democratic primary, right? Because for my race, you had to pull a Democratic ballot at the polls. I was not in the November elections, right? So for Republicans to be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to pull a Democratic ballot really meant a lot because they were willing to base their ballot off of one candidate, right? Because what that means is that they pull the Democratic ballot, they will see me, but also they will see all the Democratic nominees for governor. Exactly, right? So I would say that was really impactful. And I told people, look, even if you don't vote for me, I had a conversation also with a neighbor of mine as well. And she was, I would say, a very far right, a person, in the sense that she actually was a bit more, I think, to the right of Trump on certain issues. And for example, Iran, right, the war in Iran, happening with bombing people there as well. She was very much pro bombing, really putting using U.S. taxpayer money, right, for overseas excursions versus putting money here in the pockets of Americans, right. And so we did have disagreements there, where we had very passionate disagreements. But at the end of the day, I said, you know what, you're my neighbor, right? We know each other, right? In fact, I know that my girlfriend's mother, actually, she would always go out and give her food from her backyard, from her garden, right? And so she was very much, ingrained in our community, right? And so even if we had disagreements, even if I know for a fact that she not vote in a Democratic ballot, right? But even then, we did have agreements on property taxes, for example, right? A big contentious issue in local government, state government, is property taxes, millage rates, taxes increasing every single year. And so I said, you know what? I agree with you. I don't agree with you on sending, U.S. Taxpayer money overseas, right, to fund wars. But I do agree that we should have lower property taxes, right? We believe we should have lower income taxes, because you spend too much money right now, and you don't see enough in return, right? And I did truly believe in that, right? So even if we don't agree on certain big topics and issues, the small topics and issues also allow us to have a reasonable conversation.
And in democracies, you're not supposed to agree with everybody on every issue. But
you're not.
As Americans, we tend to agree more than we disagree.
Correct.
With each other. We agree on more, I think.
I think so too. And when it comes to those issues, it doesn't matter necessarily whether people agree or not with your perspective. But what do you feel like the biggest issues were for your district and your campaign?
Yep. So biggest issues really was property taxes. Another big issue as well was when it came to public schools. Now we have, Gwinnett County Public Schools is the leading school district in the state, right? We are known for great schools. We are known for being one of the largest employers in Gwinnett County as well, regarding teachers, support staff, administration, et cetera, et cetera. And all that to say is that we also had parents who were not as content with the way that schools were operating. I'll give you an example. When they would talk about scores, they weren't really happy with some of the scores that we had, right? And I had conversations with teachers where there were policies like No Child Left Behind, where they were not really content with that, because they felt like it was restricting their ability to effectively teach their student, so that way their student doesn't graduate from high school reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level, right? And so through that, I said, you know what, parents, I agree with you. I empathize with you. I do not know what it's like to have a child in school, but as someone who was most recently in school, I understand that education and public education is a very big priority for folks in this district, right? Especially because, look, we have a 30% immigrant population, right? Wow. I know many immigrants come in, right? They see, okay, well, where should I move, right? Yeah. And they oftentimes move to the district that has a high school, test rate, or has a high standard of living, right? And so through that, I do know that a lot of parents weren't content. I also know that another issue as well was gun protection from gun violence. And so through that, I know that there was issues regarding metal detectors. We need to invest more in metal detectors. We need to have more gun safety storage laws, more red flag laws put in place. Because again, their children are their priority. They would do anything for their children. And for them to even risk, to even feel an iota of okay, well, what's going to happen if I send my kid off to school one day and I get the terrifying news that there might have been a school shooting, right? Or there might have been an active shooter alert or whatever. I mean, recently, this was maybe the 3rd week before elections, I got a message from one of my volunteers, my canvassers, told me that, look, there was a situation happen, I believe it was at Norcross High School, where there was an active shooting alert as well, where they were in lockdown. It was scary. Her family was also scared for her. They reached out, and I said, you know what? She was scheduled to canvass that day. I said, take the week, take the day, right? You need that time. And really, she was able to talk to me more about it. And I know that she and her classmates were scared. I do know that I am thankful that the school administration acted out quickly. They communicated to the parents. They had a very good lockdown system put in place. But again, we're talking about preventative measures, that shooter should have never been there in the first place, should have never been allowed there or been close to a school or anywhere else for that matter in the first place, right? So these are issues that regarding taxes, regarding affordability, regarding public safety and accessibility, those were the number 3 or 4 option or top 3 or 4 issues that I heard about consistently at the doors of people that I would speak to.
And those cut across party lines. It's not part, none of that's
Absolutely.
party. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, really. So, I think back to when I decided to run for Congress against Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was on January 6th after watching that. I came into it not knowing, didn't know what I didn't know. And, I saw that. I'd seen all the white hot rhetoric that led up to January 6th. I warned about that. And I come from a world, the Army and government, where I was apolitical. We didn't discuss politics. We didn't care what each other's, political preferences were, what political party people belonged to. You didn't ask because you didn't care. It was always mission first.
Correct.
But the experience of running for Congress, that changed me. How has this experience running in for a state house seat, how has it changed the way you think about politics or public service in general?
I think it is allowing me to view this in not so much a transactional manner in which what can they do for me, but rather what I can do for them without expecting anything in return, right? I believe that public servants should be selfless. I believe that they should be someone that works hard for every single person, regardless of any recognition they would have, right? One of the truly most effective representatives that I am really inspired by every day is Representative Marvin Lim in the State House. He is actually a neighboring district from mine up in Norcross and Tucker. And he does so much work for people, for residents, constituents. And a lot of it oftentimes is not televised. It's not put on news. It's not put on social media even sometimes, right? And I know that because I worked with him one time, right? I was one of his ambassadors. I'll go out there and also help him at events that weren't publicized, but that they were at least spread out to certain neighborhoods and that they would know and they would be a word of mouth, right? So I say this because one of the most effective representatives isn't very well known. He isn't a household name by any means outside of his district. And his district is very well known, don't get me wrong. But I say this because it made me view politics in a different lens. I think initially I came into this a bit more cynical, as I'm sure many of us are still to this day, right? We view politics as a form of corruption, as a way to people to enrich themselves when they're in office. And don't get me wrong, there are many politicians who are corrupt. Many politicians who are using this as a way to enrich themselves, to benefit themselves, and that's
what happening every day at the highest levels.
We see it at the highest levels of government, right, which is terrible. And even then, we also see that at the local levels as well. And so I say all to say is because through this campaign, I learned so much about the issues that impact residents, but I also learned that no matter what happens, that there still is hope. Hope always wins out. And ensuring that you have a community that is united, right? As I said before, it takes a village. It takes a village to do everything you want to do. And knowing that you had neighbors who kept in contact with each other, right? I would speak to sometimes HOA presidents. I would speak to neighborhood community leaders who would talk to their people as well. And they would come back to me and say, hey, Nico, these are the issues that we're facing, right? Realizing that there is a lot of communication that we can tap into. People that are again, we assume, because of course we see the way that politics is done, there is so much apathy there. And it is true, there is a lot of political apathy. There's a lot of voting apathy there. In my district alone, we had a 4% turnout in the primaries. Now, because of our election, we were able to boost that up to 10%, the turnout, right? Now, even 10%, it's still a low number, right? It's a bit better than 4%, but the reality is
that's more than double.
It is more than double, right? But a lot of people stay home. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily not involved with political or civic processes, right? Many of them are very involved when it comes to, let's say, HOA management, when it comes to, let's say, fixing the roads, right? Fixing the infrastructure, cleaning up roads, being involved with local board meetings and whatnot, right? So there are a lot of people who also care about, let's say, good paying jobs, right? We have a lot of, every time I step out my house. And so we confuse the low number of voting, of electoral turnouts with, let's say, people don't care. And I don't think that's true. I truly don't think that. I think people
I
do
agree.
care, but they are waiting for someone that they can feel confident voting for. They are waiting for someone to motivate them, to energize them to go out and vote. Unfortunately, right, previous candidates from top to bottom have not done so. And I do believe that with the reception that we received at the doors, that my campaign, and not just me, but like many others as well, that were able to, because again, my volunteers, right, they were a reflection of myself with the campaign. They would also talk to people on behalf of our campaign, and we would hear the same experiences from them as well, right, that they heard people, we communicated with them, and they really felt motivated this time around to go vote. And so that meant a lot. It meant a lot because people just are waiting for someone to tap into this potential, to this pool of energy, and to bring them from the couches to go to the polls. And so I do have that in me. So
I think you articulated that very well, and I think it's true. I get asked a lot of times about what the problem was with the 2024 presidential campaign, and I know I've said it on the show before, but it's that I think they were, first of all, they needed to be targeting the people who were for sure going to vote, which was the swing voter. And we thought that if somebody even considered voting for Donald Trump, that they were lost to the Democratic Party. And that was never true. And people who come on our show often are speaking about their conversations with Republicans, even though they're Democrats, because they're willing to create that bridge. But the thing that I always make sure to tell people is, if you are trying to motivate those Democrats who just don't vote, that 1/3 of Americans who don't vote, you're not going to do it by scaring them into voting, because they already think that their vote doesn't matter.
Correct.
So if their vote doesn't matter, they're going to think, well, I'm not going to be able to do anything about it anyways if something goes wrong, right? Like, I'm not going to prevent anything. And so it is tapping into that hope piece, I think, that that you identified. And maybe that I really don't think that it's just about being young, like that you and I are going to, support that and think, I've crossed the threshold in a couple of weeks. I turned 35 like in 3 weeks. So I can't say that necessarily anymore. But, I tell people all the time, there's enough cynical people. This is just my role. But what do you think your generation in particular has to offer in moving forward in politics? What do you think that your generation has in terms of perspective that you can offer?
I mean, well, I would say that we, as Gen Z, right? I'm Gen Z. I can't speak, of course, for Gen Alpha, right? The generation that's also now growing up in schools, in public schools, right? But I do know that. Sorry?
I think we're all terrified of them.
Well, I did have some on my team, actually. But yes, I do agree with you, though. But I think, well, so the way I see it is that we represent, I would say, crossroads, where we see what has happened, in our textbooks, on the news, from conversations with our parents about what had happened for the past 50 years, 60 years, right? Decades. And we see that what is happening is that oftentimes these policies that these 70-year-old lawmakers started proposing are not really effective. They're not working for us. They're working perhaps to enrich themselves, but they're not working for the people that are going to be inhabiting this earth. And not to be blunt, but oftentimes these people that are proposing these laws are proposing them, and they have effects 50 years, 60 years down the road, but they will not be there to see what will happen.
To feel the effects.
They're just
okay with that. It's crazy.
They are. And so I think the cynical part of me is like, well, yeah, it's because, they receive a paycheck from a corporation that wants to buy off their interests, right? But whatever reason or motivation, the effect is still the same. So what I encourage every single young person out there is to go out, get involved, to realize that, look, not everything is sunshine and flowers, right? It was certainly not for me. I had to work really hard to be able to get where I am now. But again, that just shows that, if we come together as a unit, right? As a force united, as someone that realizes that, hey, these are issues that impact us as young people, that we want to have good paying jobs, that we want to be able to go to college and not be in debt, that we want to be able to live an affordable life, to be able to rent out an apartment, to one day have a house, to one day raise a family, to one day not be, again, having to focus on property taxes and taxes all the way till like for people to be able to retire at a decent age, at a young age. That is what we want, and that is what we're not gonna stop fighting for that.
I mean, isn't the goal of each generation to stand on the shoulders of the generation before you
Correct.
and do better than that generation? I know that's the goal that I want for my kids. I
Correct.
want to do better than I did, you know, and I have
correct
kids your age.
Yeah.
And I call them kids because they're my kids.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Kids your age who, you know, they're sweating it a little bit. They're like, you know, we're not going to be able to afford a house like this. You know, they're still living home, you know, they're in school and living at home. And they're like, okay, we're not going to be able to afford or do what you did, you know, because it's just not set up that way. And I'm like, guys, this is what I'm fighting for. So that when we pass this torch
correct
along, you guys are ready to take it and run with it. So,
correct. Yeah. I mean, I tell people, look, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Someone very famous said that we stand on the shoulders of giants, but you know, the water's still above our heads. And that rings true because, you know, we have so many issues in life, right? That are persistent. And especially when it comes to poverty, especially when it comes to the issue of homelessness, right? Or the risk of homelessness. That is a very big issue, especially in Metro Atlanta. And so that is something that, again, we need to combat. When it comes to, let's say, focusing on VA, on veterans, right? Understanding that a lot of them have done so much for our country, in sacrifice of our country, but are not receiving enough in return from their country that they served, right? So realize that we are the richest country in the world.
The history of the world.
The history of the world. But we can't even afford basic health care for everyone. And that really is what kind of keeps me up at night, realizing that we are so ineffective in the way we put our budget, the way we spend money on our budget. We have a bloated military budget, but we don't have a bloated healthcare budget or a school education budget, right?
We're really kind of the few first world countries that can't get that right. The healthcare and education.
Yeah,
we're one of the few. I mean, out of what 33, we're one of two countries that doesn't have it right, like the rest of them. So I mean, you know, and I'm a Gen Xer, and you know, 20 years ago, you couldn't have paid me to believe that I would be here dealing with the issues that my grandparents were dealing with and the rights that they were fighting for us to have. You couldn't have paid me to believe that.
Correct.
In this country, in the year of our Lord 2026, that we would be fighting the same battles that my grandparents were fighting.
Yeah, yeah.
For civil rights.
And you say that because also, like, you know, history has a tendency of repeating itself, right? And most importantly, I don't want my grandchildren down the road to also, you know, go on a podcast like this and lament about, you know, and all the
saying the same things you're saying now.
I don't want them. I want them down the road. I want my grandchildren to go on a podcast with people like us, right? And speak about the good things that have happened in life, right? All the good policies that are being put into effect, right? All the high rates that we have, the high numbers that we're having, the standard of living has raised significantly, right? That's what I want them to talk about, right? I don't want them to talk about issues necessarily or so much issues that are happening. I mean, don't get me wrong, there will be issues, but I want them to have different issues, not the same issues we're dealing with nowadays, right?
Issues that are more evolved issues.
Correct, more evolved. Right? Not just about basic affordability and healthcare and human rights.
Yes.
Let me go ahead and put a fine point on it, Nico. I know we've taken up way more of your time than we anticipated doing, but what would you say to other young people your age who are considering running to be public servants, but just don't know how to get involved or aren't sure of how to do it? What would you say to those guys?
So I give a little bit of unconventional advice, right? I think typically advice is given to these to young people to get involved with their county committee, their local Democratic committee, to get involved with perhaps their Young Democrats or other, you know, organizations or affiliates. And don't get me wrong, that is a good experience. That is a good way to get involved with, I guess, more political, you know, relationship building, right? But most importantly, don't forget why you're doing this. You're not doing this because of some, you know, shady operative, right? That's sitting in a room, in a dark room, right? Wouldn't get off money for call time. You're doing this because you believe in you know, the people that you are looking to represent, right? You believe in working for them. There is a why. And I had a mentor of mine, right? Someone that's sat with me one day at a cafe. He asked me, Nico, what is your why? And I think early on, I kind of realized, like, you know what, like, why is he asking me my why? I was like, I know what my why is, right? But he was like, really think about what your why is, and see if that is in agreement or in line with what you want to do. And it was, because what I wanted to do most importantly, most of all, was to create a better life for my parents, for my girlfriend, right, for my loved ones, for my family. And the policies that that I supported were going to do just that.
Mhm.
And so what was my why, and versus what I said, what I supported in public, aligns. And so I think for people that are out there watching, understand this, right? That you are going to be a public figure, a public servant, right? That you are someone that is doing this in a selfless way. There will be times where you will not be giving much credit. There will be times when you'll be down in the dumps, that you feel alone, that you feel like no one else in this universe, in this world will listen to you or will help you out. But also understand,
criticisms will
correct.
come.
There will criticisms will come, right? But understand this: there is light at the end of that tunnel. That there is light in the fact that win or lose, that you still have conversation with folks. If you win, even better. You're able to work for these people. You're able to actually have, resources at your disposal to make their lives truly much better. If you lose, try again. Do not give up. I won't give up. I've had conversations with people after this election, voters that said, you know what, Nico, we voted for you. We want you to run again in 2028, 2032. I've had elected officials who've actually contacted me as well. But all that to say is that, sure, I appreciate the words of encouragement. But the only reason why I would run for office is because if I talk to people and I see that the issues still persist and remain, that is when I'll run for office. And that is my why. The people that I'm running for is always my why. It is never because of some sort of establishment Democratic leader, some sort of, committee chairman or chairperson, right? It's always because of the people that I grew up with, the people that I want to align myself with. So realize this, right? That you will have crossroads, you will have many obstacles to come, right? You have many decisions to make, but always be authentic to yourself, because you want to go to sleep at night realizing and thinking about the good things you did and about the things that you could have done. Right. And so that's really what I believe in. And I want everyone to understand that there's so much potential that you have. You just have to realize it, right? Take control of your own life and work hard for what you want to do.
Allow me, if you will, to put a fine point on your answer. Nico is running for family and community.
Yes.
Or ran for family and community. That's his why.
Yes.
If we had more of that in this country, because that was part of my why as well, so that we could get back to a sense of family and community, because that's what we are in this country. And if we had more politicians running or more candidates running on that why, community, we'd have a better government.
We would.
You understand that.
Correct.
It's about community. That's all we are.
And let me make another point as well, right? My why is my Colombian parents. It's the Korean grandpa down the road. It's the Magali aunts down the streets. It is the Jamaican neighbor I have that I walk with every time I walk my dog. It is the people that I interact with on a daily basis, whether it's at a Waffle House, a Kroger's, a Walmart, right? These people are what community is. Yeah. We are what community are. And so I think understanding that is paramount. It's key to realizing that.
It gets lost in the rhetoric that we see on the news, that it really is about community, when
it is.
All of that fear and everything is about separating people from their communities.
Correct.
It's as simple as that. So I love that you articulated that.
And it sounds like you're saying stay inspired.
Stay inspired.
Always, never give up, right? Again, don't get me wrong, I will never sugarcoat things. I've been out to many events before. I've been out to many FBLA events to be speakers, guest speakers. I speak to a lot of young people. I recently had a press conference as well, where I speak about the dangers of heat exhaustion and whatnot. But always understand that there will be problems that exist, but there are not enough people that will fight to fix those problems, right? And that is what I want people to understand. Whether you want to be a fighter or someone who complains about the issues, right? That is what decision you need to make.
Nico Parra, thank you for joining us today, brother.
Thank you so much
for an inspired conversation. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep holding the line. Stay in the fight.
Keep that energy, please.
Keep it.
I will.
It's going to serve you well. I told you this first time we met. you're going to go a long way.
That's for sure.
Thank you so much.
Godspeed, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. Thank you guys.
Have a good one.
What a sweetheart.
Yeah. I mean, I told you that he's a great guy, and I see him having a long political career.
Oh, he's such a sweetheart, and I'm glad that we ended on the point about family, because it's very clear that that's what keeps him going. So, and because if you're inspired by something that's real to you, that truly matters, I feel like you get like a gift from your ancestors about that. Like you tapped into like a universal truth that your ancestors worked for too, especially if your ancestors were immigrants, right? I mean, you get all that energy. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, and I always describe it as community. That it's something that I feel like we've lost our sense of community in this country.
Yeah.
I want to get it back. That was one of the things that stood out to me about January 6th. All of the fear mongering and the white hot rhetoric that was going too far.
Yeah.
It was all about breaking our sense of community that we have. And
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. And
that was the outcome, a predictable outcome.
Yeah.
Even
that's
so.
the desire.
Yeah. Well, that is the desire for some who that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, let's get into the news a little bit.
Let's do it.
What do you got? When do you want to start off?
Okay. So let's take a look here. Oh, it's Pride Month.
It is Pride Month.
I love Pride Month. I love Pride Month in Atlanta specifically. So when I first moved here and I was in college, I was dating this guy who like did all this theater stuff. And so all my friends were theater kids. And we ended up doing this production called The Local. And it was about Atlanta stuff. And I did this one piece about like the cyclorama where it was like this young like white girl who had never seen like the history of what her people did to slaves in Georgia. And she had like, it just changes her completely. But then that was like a past one, and they did a present one called Happy Pride. And I didn't know about it. I'm like from, Indiana. I'd never seen anything like this. Right. And so I'll be there.
That is a whole other.
So this is like, 15 years ago still. So, and even in Indiana now, if they have something, they didn't have it back then. And I got to dress up like a pride girl and have like a rainbow skirt and a rainbow umbrella and walk around saying Happy Pride all the time. And then at the time I was living at 6th and Charles Allen. So you know where like 10th and Juniper is, where they have the rainbow.
Yep.
And if y'all know Atlanta, I'm sure you've seen a picture of like Piedmont Park. It's like right there, where that rainbow square is. Being in the gay community in Atlanta, or just even being in like the theater community, puts you in the gay community in Atlanta. And I was actually in the sister chorus to the Atlanta Gay Men's Chorus, which is probably like a third LGBTQ. It's such an artistic, fun, beautiful, happy, smart community. It's I just love it so much, and it makes perfect sense to me. Right? That people on the other side are afraid of people who are drag queens because they're the most inspirational people teaching you how to be yourself. So I understand that they're afraid of that, because of course you'd be afraid of somebody who teaches you that you are beautiful just the way you are,
And I was proud to see here in this district, or the district that I live in, or Marjorie Taylor Greene's old district, Clay Fuller's district now, I guess we have to say that it was coming on in like Rome. I went to some of the first big celebrations there for Pride, and I was like, okay, it's really picking up here. I'm happy to see us turning the corner there on that. So everybody, Atlanta's close, but
no, that's amazing. And I just I remember sitting at the Flying Biscuit. Flying Biscuit is like it was one of the very first LGBTQ like hangout friendly places in Georgia, let alone Atlanta. That's where I found out I passed the bar. That I used to sit at the one at 10th and Juniper during Pride so that I could just like sit and just keep drinking orange juice and coffee as they would go by. And then there would be drag queens giving people like mimosas on the street for free. And to me, it was just a reminder of how our LGBTQ like friends and neighbors and family members like set an example of like what's possible when you have like the bravery to go inside yourself and then develop that emotional intelligence to come back out and be who you are. Like it's just I love it so much. And there's this debate that just happened on Jubilee. Did you watch that one that just happened with what's his face? Dave Rubin?
I missed that.
So he's gay and has a husband and adopted children, but he's a Republican. He's like a super Trump supporter. And so it was interesting to watch him go against Maybe, who is a drag queen who's running for a position in Los Angeles. And she, first of all, like approached with compassion because she's gonna, right? But like still aggressively enough to be able to get her point across. And I was sitting across from my husband while I was watching it, and I heard her say, I refuse to punish people for being poor in public. And I like dropped everything. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Like that level of like concise delivery and like impact can only come from somebody who like, you don't have to experience that yourself, but you have to have some empathy to get it, you know?
You gotta have it.
And it's just their role in our society is one that I think is so difficult, but it's one that like their very existence calls out people who are inauthentic, sacrifice that they've taken on that maybe they agreed to, maybe they didn't agree to in another lifetime, but them existing with that level
thrust into it or not.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I love Pride. I love Pride Month. I love it in Atlanta in particular.
There's a special thing here in Atlanta, and if you haven't ever been to it, I recommend you go at least once in your life.
So fun.
Yeah. On to some bad news.
Yes.
We lost another good one, Peabo Bryson. And for those of you who don't know who Peabo Bryson is, you know who Peabo Bryson is. You've heard his music. I mean, the world from Frozen, Beauty and the Beast, you know.
Let's pull up some of the songs actually here. Wait, let me see. Peabo Bryson songs. Let's see here.
You know,
oh yeah, Beauty and the Beast. Oh my God, A Whole New World. Help me. Oh my God.
I'm not a good singer, so it's probably embarrassing that if I sing.
You're fine. Everybody can sing, Marcus.
You know, we seem to be losing a lot of the old stalwarts, you know, in the music.
We lost Barney Frank 2 weeks ago.
Barney Frank a couple of weeks ago. And I was telling Keith, I saw one of his last interviews, and he was talking, and I was like, you know, I just caught it.
Yeah.
I think it was actually the day he died. It was on Jake Tapper or something. And I was like, who's that? I was like, is that Barney Frank? He'd lost so much weight. And, you know, it was, you know, he was a fighter. Speaking of the LGBTQ community.
Oh, yeah.
That guy, you know, we missed him in Congress. He was one of the guys that would get out there and fight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just, you know, set an example.
Yeah.
I love that. So I know we don't have a ton of time left, so maybe we could talk a little bit about redistricting.
Let's get right into it.
Cool. So I wrote an article this week. Thank you to all of the folks who pushed that open button, and thank you to our beautiful producers and Melissa for giving me all the good tips and editing that I absolutely needed. Because I told them actually once I stopped practicing law and I realized that there weren't any rules anymore that I had to follow, particularly, I just got a little crazy with it. But
let me. You wrote this piece before the Supreme Court did their thing in Alabama.
I did.
And you were focusing on Alabama.
I did because I thought it was the perfect example. There just isn't a better example of how to explain it. So I start out, interestingly, because we transitioned from an LGBTQ story. I started out the piece by talking about how Representative Sarah McBride really inspired me on a podcast that she was on with Ezra Klein, where she was talking about how we move forward in society. And she was really talking about having a politics of grace and being able to walk people through something that they don't understand, that you really shouldn't have to, right? Especially if you're that marginalized person. Like, you shouldn't have to explain your humanity to somebody. You shouldn't, Black voters shouldn't have to explain why their vote matters, or, you know, the history of racism that came behind it. And what she said was, but if they're willing to, they like, please let them. And so I really do think it's my responsibility, especially as somebody who's not in one of those marginalized communities, but sees the truth and is able to explain it, and like has the time, you know, for me to do that. So the Alabama piece that I really dug into was, I gave the whole background and then basically gave the argument that I would give if I were on TV. Because one of the skills that I've had to develop being in these debates is getting my point narrowed down to like 20 seconds if I get cut off, right? So that and I couldn't get it down to 20 seconds, but if you spoke it really fast, you could get it down to 45, I think, from what I sent people. But the point is for you to be able to have things that you can repeat to your friends and family when you're talking about this, so you can educate them about why redistricting is racist. And it's basically, first of all, especially with Alabama, right? There's this stretch of land that's called the Black Belt, because it refers both to the Black folks who lived there, who worked the plantations that were there, and the soil on which they worked. That's why
I'm from the Black Belt
in Alabama
originally. Yes,
and it's conveniently centrally located throughout these states, right? So it makes it very easy specifically to break them up, right? They call it packing and cracking, right? So the way I think about it is like a starburst, right? If you break it all up into these different sections to where you can, on the one hand, right, dilute their vote, because if you pack all the Black voters that are in this Black Belt into one district, then they have the power to elect somebody to represent them, right? But at the same time, then their voice isn't being represented in other places. Then you can also crack it and dilute it the other way. So rather than trying to explain why that's a problem, because those are true things, but that's the thing that, like, for example, Brian Tyler Cohen focuses on when he explains it. And that's the truth. But I took a different route and basically said, according to HUD, right, since 1988, which actually it was 1968 when housing discrimination was officially outlawed, because it was actually straight up legal before then. It really wasn't until 1988 until the law got any teeth, and it's been, I guess, like
the redlining laws that, you know, kind of, you know, you can't really buy a house in this district, where the mortgage companies were like, okay, you know, we're going to keep Black people on what we would say on this side of the railroad tracks, or versus that side of the railroad tracks.
According to HUD, there's been not much change at all. And so Republicans, when they do that cracking of districts, they are benefiting from years of housing discrimination that, according to statistics, really won't start changing until the next 30 years. Because think about it, even if you have the means to move far away from your parents in the same state, why would you want to? Like, people want to live near their families, and they shouldn't be punished for that. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is, when you draw, and this is my favorite argument, so please steal this. When you draw the districts, right? It's not stealing, it's open knowledge. But when you draw the districts, right, the point is that there's supposed to be an interest that you have in common with, for example, the city or the county next to you that isn't represented by the lines that already exist, right? Like the counties or the city lines that already exist. So you group them together, right? Like if there's a data center, that water impacts both sides or whatever. Well, the thing in Alabama is that the Black Belt district, they broke up to combine with the two districts below, right? And this one is called the Wiregrass District, which is super agricultural. And the other one's the Gulf Coast District, which is about fish, right? It's about fishing.
And tourism. It's a lot of
tourism.
The area, right? With like Gulf Shores and Mobile Bay. You know, so yeah, you got a lot of tourism in that area. Mobile, Daphne, Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, you know.
Orange,
Yeah, you got all of that down there. That brings in a lot of tourist dollars. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the Black Belt, where it's probably, well, the Wiregrass District is more peanut farmers, but the Black Belt is more pea farmers and things like that. You know, like my granddaddy was. In that
oh, that's cool. So I didn't know that.
He was also a sheriff and a farmer. So
sheriff, that's so badass.
So
that's so badass. But that's the deal, is that they would pretend like the same issues that existed in these districts were the same ones that existed here. And so in the article, I talk about how the average median income is like $50,000 different. Right. The rate of poverty is, it was like, I don't know, it's ridiculous.
3 or 4 times
higher,
different.
Right? So the primary issues that a representative from this area is going to be advocating for are entirely different. And so when we had the Supreme Court on our side, then people who would challenge these maps and say, you broke this up and there's no actual reason to group these districts together, what they would do is they would go to court and they would have people testify who lived in those districts, and city planners and like state representatives who would go and talk about, and you would have it on the other side too, right? The other side would have to come in and prove that there was a legitimate interest in common that made sense to group those districts together. And if it was obvious that there wasn't, then the court could say, yeah, this is racist. Now, right, the rule is, unless the people who are drawing the maps in the legislature explicitly say,
they've stripped
we have done this on racial lines, you're not allowed to assume it.
They made the bar much higher to prove that it
essentially doesn't exist. And people are coming in with maps that don't have demographic data on them, period. They don't have it at all. So they don't have to prove anything. It is, so the Voting Rights Act, we needed, not just because of the housing discrimination. I mean, I feel like that's the
John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which John Lewis is also from that district. We were born in the same place.
But because the Black community hasn't had enough generations pass to where it makes sense for human beings to have spread out that far from their families, from where their families were, regardless of buying power. And secondly, because you end up with crazy ass looking maps where you've got like weird spaces combined in other places that don't make sense. And now we have to pretend that it does, even though the only explanation is that it's racist.
Let's just look at it.
Yeah,
the majority of Black people live in the Southeast.
Yes.
Why? Because this is where the majority of slaves were.
Period.
Here in the Southeast. And that's still true today. You know, you have the largest population spread out across South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. So
if you don't hear somebody making that argument on TV or on whatever platform, using the examples of how housing discrimination impacted things and the common interest, a common community interest principle, then they're not making their best argument, because I think that's the best argument.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's absolutely the best argument.
Yeah.
And people definitely go on Maddie's hot takes and Maddie's Substack and read the article. You can also see it on our With All Due Respect Substack as well. I mean, it's a great article. So
thank you.
I think that's all we have time for today, Maddie. There was so much other news we needed to get into, but that's going to be our show for today. So big thanks to our guest, Nico Parra, for joining us.
Thank you, Nico.
With some
and thank you to our team.
And a great conversation. Thank you all for tuning in with us today. Because staying informed right now, yeah, that's part of the job. That's the job. You know, we need everybody's attention. And with so much going on, I really wanted to get into Donald Trump and all of this craziness that he's got going on. But
sorry, I took up all the
time limit today. So, you know, thanks everybody for tuning in. You know, if you like what we're doing here, like and share what you see. That's what keeps us going. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, with all due respect, everybody. Godspeed.
We love y'all. Thanks.